Hello, everyone, and welcome to our continuation of the series of Blueprint Lab workshops. And this one is a really awesome one. We have Eric Vogelpohl joining us, and then we also have three special guests who are Blueprint interns. So we're excited to have everyone here. I do want to do a quick introduction about myself. My name is Ruthie Senanayaka, and I work here at Blueprint on the marketing team. And I get to, have a lot of fun putting all of these workshops together, and we have some really great ones lined up. So if you would like to join any future workshops, be sure to check out our LinkedIn page because we will be LinkedIn living all of these workshops to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to join in and check out these really cool experiences that we have put together. A couple housekeeping tips. If you have questions, feel free to just add them into the comments below, and our awesome presenters will do their best to answer those questions. If you have questions that you'd like answered afterward, you can always email us at info@bpcs.com, and we will be sure to get back to you on that as well. But if you have not heard too much about Blueprint, we are a technology solutions company, and we do everything from strategy to execution. So there's a lot to go into in this workshop. So I will hand it over to Eric to kick things off.
Yeah, hello everyone. Great, thank you. Welcome to the English is the New Software Development Kit workshop, or English for Analytics. We've got a couple good titles. So first, I want to kick quick logistics. You are looking at a Databricks environment. We are in a notebook. One thing I love about these workshops is the workshop developers hold me to no PowerPoints. So everything we do is done within an analytical environment, in this case, a Databricks notebook. So that's what you're seeing here if you're curious. So I'll kick off by saying I owe a huge debt of gratitude to our three awesome interns, Zoe, McGuire, and Ethan. They will have some parts today in walking through these demos with you. They've done an amazing job putting this demo together and educating me on how a lot of this stuff works. So I'm super excited to have them with me, and we'll go back and forth. Please reach out to them on LinkedIn and share your thoughts after this. So let's kick off. I want to share a couple notes real quick on this whole kind of concept of English is the new language for analytics, or English is the SDK. No doubt, unless you've lived on Mars for the last 6 months, the world got rocked by the release of OpenAI, ChatGPT, GPT, et cetera, and all the other derivatives. And come to find out, one amazing thing they're awesome at is helping analysts with code like SQL and Python, which we're going to dig into today in various demos. One of the reasons they're so good at that is, one, SQL and Python are amazingly well referenced on the internet. So ChatGPT, or GPT-4 is the one we're using in this case. They have used, they have data about SQL and Python that take them up to something like September 2021. Hasn't been a huge change in SQL since 2021. So there's a wealth of data to help them form an AI assistant role. And I really stress that it's an AI assistant. It amplifies your skills. It's not here to take your job per se, or to fundamentally change your learning paths. But from a syntax assistant and helping you reason through analytics, these models, as we'll demonstrate today, are absolutely amazing. So the wealth of information we have on SQL and Python is one reason. The other reason is that they're just really good with writing code. Code follows very pragmatic rules. So when it comes to crafting queries, they do an amazing job at that. Now, you're going to see a ton of AI-powered analytic co-pilots and assistants, et cetera, permeate their way through tons of BI tools and studios. They're popping up everywhere. But today's approach really tackles two things. One, how do we start to use and how do we start to think about using these assistants? And this is probably just good tools and patterns for any of the BI tool or the data warehousing tool that you may use. In this case, we're using the awesome Databricks platform. But if you're using another BI tool and they have some type of of English. English as an analytics tool. You can take advantage of that as well. But second, we really want to showcase the power of Spark. So Spark is the data engine, and the awesome folks and the community for PySpark.ai, which is the English is the SDK engine that we're going to use today. These folks have just done an absolutely amazing job at making a very accommodative and easy to acquire skills around way of letting us reason over data with just English. So without any more of that, let's get kicked in gear. All right, so we're going to set the stage. The scenario for today's workshop is pretty simple. You and I, we're going to play the role of, we're junior analysts. And in this case, we're analysts, and we have a bunch of data about flights, when they were delayed and what cities they flew from and to, and their airline, et cetera. And we want to find a bunch of insightful trends and outliers and metrics. However, we collectively in this workshop, we have limited Python and SQL skills. We know enough, and we're ramping up, and we really want these tools to amplify those skills. But I want to be able to speak in terms of natural language. I want to be able to ask simple English questions about my data and have the OpenAI model that the Python SDK uses, or the Spark SDK uses, to just generate the code for me and then run it and then give me a result. So that's what we're going to demonstrate today. So without further ado, let's jump into these demos. These demos are going to get progressively more difficult. We're going to start easy and we're going to work up. Ethan and McGuire are going to take us through most of them. I'm going to start us. So let's get going. So here's what we have. We have a data table from the Transportation Bureau, so the Department of Transportation statistics for airlines. And the interns have culled down the data set, so it's manageably sized for just 2022 and 2023. I think it goes up to April of 2023. I think that's the latest data we have. It's about 3 or 4 months late. And you can see the 8 or so columns that we have, very self-descriptive. So that's all we have. We have a table in our warehouse, just one table in this case, about 8 million rows of data. I just happen to know that, with those 8 columns. And from this data, we're going to do a bunch of analytics, pretty much just using English. So let's start. I'm just scrolling down the notebook. That's all I'm doing here. We're going cell by cell by cell. You can see some of the cells have, of course, nice graphics and text in them. And then some of the code here that we're working with help us progress along the way. So I've done all the setup work behind the scenes to get the PySpark AI, or the English SDK. I've got that installed in Databricks. It's working great. That was super easy. We have our key installed, no problem. And the only piece that I need to do to get going, the only piece that I need to do is just this one piece of code, which I'm certain you could get a friend to help you with if you didn't have any skills whatsoever. And all we're doing in this case is we're going to create a data frame. It's just an object that holds data in the Spark world. We're going to create a data frame called flights, and it's nothing more than saying select all records from our recent flights table, so 2022 and 2023. And I'm going to run this cell, and I'm going to get back the results, in this case, a positive result. And sure enough, I have a data frame with all the data for those columns that we saw in the graphic. So we are good to go. And I promise you, this is the only code at this point we need to write. Everything else, we're going to pretend like we live in a code-free zone, and we're going to let OpenAI and the PySpark AI SDK amplify our skills. So now that we have flights, we'll continue to use this. So first, let's take this SDK out for a spin. And one of the features that it has, one of the many features that this SDK, this software development kit has, is the ability to explain your data. This is really simple. All I had to type was flights, of course, that's my data frame, .ai, that activates the call to OpenAI, and just simply say, hey, you, explain what you know about our data. So we're going to run that cell. So what it just did is it took a piece of the data table that we have, sent it to the LLM. In this case, there's no security issue that we need to be worried about. This is an open data set. And the OpenAI 4.0 model responded back. And it said, hey, in summary, this data frame is retrieving flight data for 2022, 2023. The flight data includes the date, the cities, the arrival delays, the departure days, and the airline. So just already, we've already had a communication with the model and with OpenAI such that we're convinced that the OpenAI model, by way of the SDK, really understands our table data. It's even deciphered the ugly column names we have. So it did a really good job at that. I can probably just use natural language for those column names going forward and it will know what it's referring to. So pretty powerful. That's what explain does. All right. So let's make this a little bit harder because that was way too easy. Let's jump into our first English becomes SQL, right? So our first use of the English language as a development language. So I call this one the manager simple one. I just put a little blurb here that says, let's go ask the AI. And I want to create a data frame or a result set called rows. And I'm just simply going to use our data frame that we already created. Maybe you had a friend help you. Again, activate the AI and we say transform. And we ask it a good old fashioned English question. How many rows of data do I have in this data set? Question mark. And I'm going to go ahead and hit run cell. And again, the routine here is that the PySpark SDK, the software development kit, is going to take my question. It's going to combine that with some information about my data. It's going to send it to OpenAI. OpenAI is going to reason over that. One of the prompts that OpenAI was given was to turn back code that Databricks can actually run. And that's exactly what it's done here. Excuse me. It returned back the select count from and then a temp table. We don't really care about that. And sure enough, Databricks was able to execute the code that it got back. And sure enough, it told me it's got something like 8.9 million rows of data, which is right. So that's pretty amazing if you think about it. What we've done here is we're living now in an analytic environment. I have a table in my warehouse. I've been given the responsibility to analyze this data, given the persona that I am. And other than creating just that first data frame, everything else has largely been English. But I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm skeptical that this thing is not going to be able to keep up with an ever increasing number of demands for analysis. So the interns, McGuire and Ethan, have taken on the role of kicking this up a notch. So Ethan, I'm going to turn demo 2 over to you, and maybe you can explain what analysis you're trying to do here for this one.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So for demo 2, a summary stat, we're getting a little bit more complicated. We're trying to find some city delays in our stats. So we're going to ask the question, what's the average arrival delay in minutes for the city, Tampa, Florida? And he'll hit run. You can likely see that in there we have the column name. We ended up adding that just because it made our results a little bit better. But as he said in the beginning, you likely don't need to add that, but we did in this case. So you can see that down below, we got our SQL or SQL query. We're able to select an average of the arrival delay minutes, and we are finding the city name of Tampa, Florida. And we can see down below, there's an average arrival delay of 17 minutes around. And that seems pretty accurate to me.
Yeah, I live in Tampa, Florida, and I've never flown on a flight that left on time. So, if you were to probably narrow this down to my favorite airline, it would be higher. But yeah, I think that's probably realistic. Um, okay, so yeah, this one was pretty easy. And Ethan, would you say that if at the point that the persona you're playing right now, if you didn't have the ability to have this tool write this code for you, about how long would it take for you to figure out some of this simple stuff like average and then where, city, that kind of thing, if you were new to analytics?
I mean, being brand new, it'd probably take me, half an hour to just get my head around everything, understand the select statements, understand that I need to have an average in there and the where statement and how to filter all that data through.
Yeah.
But to just have it write it for you, it makes it a lot simpler.
Very cool. Okay, so let's keep going. Let me bring up McGuire, another intern in this year's intern group, doing some awesome work in the LLOM COE along with Zoe and Ethan. So McGuire, you called this one. Let's get it. It's a bit harder. So tell me what you're doing here with busy airports and what am I looking at?
All right. Well, this demo here is, like he said, we're kind of evaluating what airports from the data set would be considered a busy airport. And we're going to do that by submitting the message. Let's create a query of destination city names where the flight date has to be in the current year and the average number of flights per flight date has to average at least 300 per day. And then round the average flights per day to the nearest integer. So this creates the SQL query that's performing sort of an analysis on the data set to find the average number of flights per day for each city, but only cities where the average is at least 300 per day. And that's sort of where we considered to be a busy airport. And then it creates a pretty complicated query, as you can see there. The top part of the query selects the destination city name and the flight date and kind of sort of does what I said, kind of counts how many flights per day they have on average. And then from the inside, that kind of then takes the results of that first subquery and then groups them by destination name, and then only distributes or shows the top 18 cities, which were the ones with more than 300, as you can see there. So from that simple prompt, we get that complicated query and then a table with 18 cities and their average flights per day.
Yeah, that's, I have to say, I remember learning SQL and I remember learning the syntax and look, it was challenging. McGuire, I would say you say this is a bit harder, but the resulting query here is got a lot going on, right? You gave it
Definitely
a lot of intention. You told it to round the average of flights per day. Flights per day it had to get. And flights per day it's not necessarily all that easy to reason over because think about it. You've got to calculate the number of flights divided by the number of dates that we have. So it's really cool that you got the OpenAI to kind of produce this query that split it out by flight date, and then the whole thing had to be limited to greater than or equal to 300 so that you could get to the the query that you wanted to get. So this is a lot. This has got a subquery and it's got a having clause, which we don't use all the time. So McGuire, tell me, as you think about building your analytic career, and we talk internally at Blueprint and we talk with our clients, that LLMs are not necessarily here to take your jobs. They're here to amplify you. They're here to bolster your skills, radically reduce time. So just in terms of having like this co-pilot teach you, talk to me about how much of a kind of a force multiplier uplift it is just in your own career to have this SDK telling you exactly how to do this English reasoning.
Well, Yes, it definitely assists and kind of amplifies any sort of work you do. But it also, what I kind of like to use it as is sort of a tool where you can see if it does make a mistake, you can, look into the SQL query and kind of see where it messes up.
Mm.
And if you're doing it on your own, you can kind of use it to analyze your own query. It definitely speeds up the process a ton. Like Ethan said with the first one, that's 30 minutes. This is, longer. This is, you could be stuck here for a while trying to figure this out. But utilizing this tool, it's done in one simple question.
Yeah, and McGuire and Ethan both. I think Zoe even brought this up in one of our meetings this week. Where what if I took this query? What if I took this query here that the model returned, and I just see this in the kind of verbose piece that's back. What if I took this and I copied it? And I came over here to ChatGPT again, thinking about how we're increasing our skills and our affinity and sophistication with these query languages, these analytical query languages, SQL in this case. We'll get to Python. What if I jumped over to a tool like this and said, explain this query, to me, and document, each section for me. And I pasted that in, I now can extend the power of the OpenAI model. It's going to regurgitate back what this query does, and it's going to lay it out for me, right? So it's going to explain to me what this is doing kind of step by step. So Ethan and McGuire both, maybe you can tell me how you can use the ChatGPT window in this case, because I don't necessarily have a UI into it with the SDK, but how I could jump back over here to kind of check my reasoning and check my logic.
Yeah, so I mean, being able or having the power to jump over to ChatGPT and take that your query and your SQL code and be able to understand what this tool has just created is super valuable information, especially for if you don't have the knowledge base to understand what every step is going through step by step. This ChatGPT will lay it out for you. It will be like, alrighty, here's your outer query, and it will describe that. It will tell you that you're rounding the average of the flights per day. It'll kind of walk you through what's going on and what each of those key words mean, like the selected froms and the wheres.
Yeah.
And then it will walk through from the outer query to the inner query, and it will describe how the outer query and the inner query work together and how you need to, or just how the entire SQL works. And it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah, it's amazing that they can work hand in glove together. And I expect that these UIs get more and more sophisticated, whether it's in this case, the Spark SDK or the Lakehouse IQ that we saw about at the Databricks Data and AI Summit that's coming out shortly, as well as the others that are available. I expect to get more of this back and forth, this more communication style of, this is what you said you wanted, this is what I've produced. This is what we've tested, and here are my thoughts, et cetera. So as these models advance, I expect to see this back and forth reasoning to get even stronger. All right, so we're about halfway through, and we're about halfway on time, which is perfect. So now we just got our list of busy airports. We're happy there. So who's up next for demo 4, which is called Somewhat Complex? And tell me what we're doing with this next demo now that we're back in the Databricks SDK.
Yeah, so we're building off of our last block, and we're taking our busy airports and we're adding a little, so we're trying to find first the busy airports, and then we're adding the delay aspect onto that. So in our query or our prompt, we say, first, let's create a query of the destination city names where the flight data has to be in the current year and the average number of flights per flight date has to be the 300 per day for this year. So that's what we did in our last one, more or less. We're just trying to come up with the busy cities, and we need to come up with a query for that. And then next, once we have that query, let's use it to calculate the average arrival delay for each of those cities. So first you take and find the busy cities like we did in our last one, and then you want to have another query and it calculates the average arrival delay. So that's basically two SQL things in one. You're trying to create, first off, your query that creates a table, and then it's going to use the table that it just created to ask it some more questions. So we can see with this first bit of SQL code, it goes through and it finds the busy cities. It goes through and it counts for flight dates, and it finds in the current year, it finds the current year. It finds those average flight per day is over 300, and it groups all those together. It creates a table, and then it will allow us to take that table and move it down below, and we can actually use that table to find the average arrival delay in minutes. So now we have an entirely new table that has the busy cities with their average arrival delay in minutes for the current year. So a very complex SQL, some SQL code that is very complex, and even for me, I wouldn't even know where to start. Like I would come up with this what I need done, and I would have to walk through it step by step by step, and likely make a lot of mistakes. But if you're able to just write it out and have this tool do some magic, that it's able to create this SQL code and then display at the very end a perfect table of what you want. It's a very cool tool. And you may note that we had to do a little bit of hand holding in the actual prompt. There's some things like, first, let's create a query. So you need to kind of walk it step by step. You need, first, here we have our query to find the busy cities for this current year. And then next you need to go and do this. So you can't just say, we want to find the arrival delay for cities that averages over 300 flights a day for our current year. You can't be quite that simple, but you can kind of just give it English and it will do a very complex SQL call. And going down to the table, we can notice a couple of things. So, we see Orlando, Florida, and Dallas have some relatively high delay minutes of around 21 minutes. And you start thinking, why do these cities have such a high arrival delay? And, it may be because of their weather that they have there. And they may get some really bad storms that roll through, and it causes the planes to be up in the air a little bit longer than need be, or things along those lines. So something cool to investigate would be to pull in another data set. Like, let's say, weather for all of the cities in America or something along those lines. And you run it through this tool and you ask just a simple question of, what are the worst cities in the world that have some of the worst weather? And you kind of correspond those two tables together, and maybe there is a very strong relationship between the arrival delay minutes and the weather being really bad in a certain city. There's just some cool opportunities for what this tool could be used for, especially with people that don't have perfect knowledge in SQL or very expert knowledge in SQL.
It's right. And you guys showed me this. I'll bring up the website here for the SDK that we're using. It's just at, PySpark.ai. And this is a really easy page to read. It's a free tool. You can plug it in. It's just the typical library, which we've already set up. But Ethan, you reminded me that the data ingestion routine is something we didn't really demonstrate here, but it's very easy. What Ethan just described, guys, can be done in nothing more than that statement. So assuming you set up the Google kind of web search client, which is a part of the SDK, which is easy to set up, you could literally say something like, Spark, hey, create a data frame, which is what we're using, and go find, I don't know, weather data for the United States or North America or whatever for, I don't know, since 2022 and beyond. If that data don't exist behind a paywall, or it's not some complex API, for example, that you might have to go get a little bit more help with, you don't even need to know development anymore to go get that piece of descriptive data that Ethan just brilliantly said, hey, why is it that Orlando and Dallas have? What are other variables? Is it just due to the overall traffic? And it's just like more airline traffic causes more delays. It could be a bunch of things. So there's no limit, right, guys? There's no limit in the amount of data you can, the amount of sophistication you can put in your English statement. In other words, if you needed to say, join this data to, you could do that, right? Yeah. Okay, so real quick, since we've got enough time, since I'm driving Databricks here, Ethan's query resulted in this pretty sophisticated SQL statement, which Databricks dutifully ran for us against our data set, and it returned this table. I do want to show here before we get to the second half of Ethan's challenge. In Databricks, I could very easily visualize this. In fact, I'll go ahead and remove this, and I'll do this tab again. But since I have a table, I could just hit visualize, and I immediately see the result set in a very, very nice table. Just because that's the way Databricks works, it's got this really nice visual tool that you can visualize the result set of each cell, like so. But very, very common. But because this is Spark, and Spark is such a large ecosystem, doesn't necessarily have to be in this user experience. Spark can run in any place. I can put Jupyter over it and other SDKs. So Ethan, walk us through your next demo here, where you wanted to plot this and help me out.
Yeah. So I mean, this tool has a very cool ability to plot these tables that it has, and we can see plot the entire entries in this data set from lowest to highest, title the plot worst cities for flight arrival delays, and color the title bright red. So you give it this prompt, and it will run through some Spark code. It will actually generate you a plot that more or less it corresponds to what you're asking. And like Eric has pointed out, a lot of tools like Databricks have the ability to visualize their tables and all these different things. But if you're running it just off of a Jupyter notebook on your local machine, and maybe it's VS Code or something like that, you won't have necessarily the ability to just visualize it right away. So this gives a lot of, or it's a very cool tool to just be able to say, here's the plot that I want created, and here's my table, or here's my data. I want it plotted. I want the title to be bright red, and I want, to have the data set from lowest to highest entries. And it will go through, it will figure out what you're asking for, and it will eventually give you back a plot, which is a very cool feature that this tool has along with it.
Yeah. So it looks like we've run into a little traffic jam with the OpenAI. So the wrapper, the SDK that this development kit, it's just a wrapper around making nicely prompted calls to the OpenAI model. So we just got a little traffic warning light that maybe OpenAI is putting us on hold. So while this is running, I'm going to take this opportunity to show. Well, there we go. So I'll actually let Ethan run through this. It looks like it's visualizing the code. So again, Ethan basically said, hey, we have this data frame that he created before. Well, he prompted before of the delay at busy airports. And then we just turned on the AI assistant and said, hey, instead of transform, let's plot. So he gave it this thing and it's plot. So Ethan, it looks like we've gotten past our limit here. So tell us what we're looking at now.
Yeah, perfect. So it looks like, it created some Spark code, and we can see that if you don't know exactly what you're looking at, and I sure don't know a whole lot about Spark, but it seems like you got an app name in there and you asked for a title of the worst cities for flight arrival delays. So it's creating a title in Spark. It's sorting those values by the average arrival delay minutes, which another thing you were asking from lowest to highest in that time frame. And it's going to go through and it's going to create your plot and it's going to show it over to you and it's going to display it. So we see down at the bottom, it displays a nicely looking plot. It got the title, it's red, it's displaying them from lowest to highest. As we can see, it has the correct title. Everything that we asked for is here in this plot, which is a very cool feature since normally you don't have access to it unless you have, sometimes you're running it off of Databricks or other tools, but a lot of the tools don't have access to these visualization features. So it's a very handy thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, guys, I tell you, in my professional life, I work with a lot of data scientists and a lot of data engineers, and I've seen them day after day after day work through the data science workload is about 80% data engineering and about 20% data science. That's kind of the joke in the data science world. Is it's a lot of iterative of data engineering work that it takes just to get down to the point where you get a data set that's useful for the scientific reasons that you have. And I've seen these folks kind of painfully work out this code to plot things so that they can see if averages or mins and max and standard deviations and variances and ratios and all the things that that team is so good at. I see them work through just a lot of syntax. And when in this case you're using the Spark tool, it's amazing how it just produced all this for you. And then even it explains what the code does. I don't even need to jump back over to ChatGPT and say, explain, explain this code for me, which I can do, right? I can paste that code back, which I just copied. I can explain that code back and ask it to explain it to me, and it will. But in this case, and you can see what it's doing. It's taking the code and it's saying, hey, absolutely, I'll break it down for you. I'll tell you exactly what it's doing. So yes, ChatGPT gives you this nice environment. But guys, look, the SDK did almost exactly that for me. So you can read this paragraph and you can go back up to the requirements that you put in the plot and you can compare them and say, yep, it's doing exactly what I asked it to do. But also the beauty about being in this environment is I can edit those. If I didn't want this to be red, I wanted it to be brown or green, I can change the code and hit run, and I stay right here in this environment. And again, since we've got a little bit of time and I'm driving the keyboard, let's do this. I'm just going to go ahead. I know we're doing a lot of things without me typing just for efficiency's sake, but I'm going to interject here and just show you what this would be like if we didn't have all this stuff pre-cooked, like a cooking show, and we were just doing it by hand. So in this case, in Databricks, I'm just going to clear my cell outputs just because I want to clean up my screens. I don't want all this stuff that I've already run to be polluting my screen. So I'll just clear that and get just a blank cell. And I remember I still have this data frame that that Ethan created a second ago or prompted a second ago. So I'm just going to do the same thing by hand to show you that we didn't do anything magic here. This is just kind of how the tool works. So we're going to say, delay at busy airports, and the IntelliSense that Databricks provides shows up. And again, the only special trainable piece of information that you need that is a little bit nerdy is this idea that this data frame, which holds the data that we want to analyze, has that feature called AI, and AI has these features within it. So normally we did the transform. We don't want to do the transform. We don't want to do the plot. So I'm going to take a chance here, and I'm going to say plot a nice graph. I'm really going to be verbose here of busy airports and their average arrival delay in minutes, and make the title fit the analysis, and sort by city name instead of the other. And I'm just going to hit Command Enter. Guys, we haven't done this. I've never done this before. This is totally live. Let's see what we get. Ruthie, how are we doing on questions and participation? Anything on your side?
I haven't seen anything come through, but if anyone has questions, be sure to add them in the comments, and I'll bring them up to the team.
Great. Okay, we're going to let this run. And while that one's running, we're going to get a quick sneak peek here in just a second on the last demo that we have in this series before we jump over and do a couple more demos. But Ethan and McGuire, let's see what we got from literally just typing it in right there to show people that this is literally nothing more than English. So let's walk through it. Looks like it had to import Plotly. Sure, fine. In Pandas, great. In this case, it imported a Spark session. It's not necessary in Databricks, but doesn't matter. Converted to the data frame. Great, fine. It's sorted by city name. So it did the first thing I asked it to do, or the last thing I asked it to do. So fix that. And then sure enough, it plotted the X and Y of destination and the average. So we had the average available to us. And it came up with a title. Notice I just gave it the prompt, come up with a title that fits the analysis. I didn't say anything else. And the model was smart enough to say average arrival delay in minutes for busy airports. And that's really interesting because nowhere in my prompt I did say busy airports. So it took this general notion that I said of busy airports and it incorporated that formally into the title, which is quite nice. And sure enough, it put Atlanta first and Washington last. It's amazing. This would have saved an hour, 20 minutes worth of time for a moderate developer to work through those tedious plot commands. All right, McGuire, walk us through the hardest one of all.
All right. Well, for this demo 5, we're going to get a little more complicated, and we're going to go to a new thing we haven't really tackled yet, and those are airline performances. And for this plot, I'll read off the prompt shortly, but we're breaking it down between Tampa, Florida, and Cincinnati, Ohio. And then first, we have to get rid of flights that don't have a delay. And we kind of know that based on the question, but for the prompt, we've added it in at that second sentence that saying, let's focus solely on flights that are delayed. So exclude flights where the arrival delay minute is 0. And also, we only want to compare airlines that Cincinnati and Tampa have in common. So you give them a little hint, and you say, make sure you find the intersection of airlines for those two cities. And this prompt, again, you kind of seems like a lot of the prompts aren't super straightforward, but they kind of encompass everything that the model needs. And what I like about this is you notice you don't tell it what type of prompt, what type of plot it needs to come up with. It sort of figures it out on its own. Like in Eric's above, he just said plot it. You'll see in a second what sort of thing this kind of comes up with.
Yeah, and we talked about this as we've been experimenting with this SDK about how nerdy we get with our English, right? So how much we have to form our English into how SQL thinks, right? And we experimented a lot back and forth. And I think collectively we found in the lab that we can be pretty general with respect to the English. up to a point, right? Like you just said, McGuire, where, at some point, and I think this is an important lesson learned, that you found, is at some point you do kind of want to express your question in a way that makes sense, with a way with a way that makes sense. Looks like we got a little error on this one. Let me see if I can run this again. That's just it. We'll just go run all, and we'll kick that start again. Oh, let's do this. It looks like I've got a little bit of a Python error here. And death by demo. Let's detach and reattach. And go away. I've had this a couple times with this SDK, so it's a little bit new, but that's all right. So let me do this. Let me catch up real quick with this, my internal code, and run my little setup again. And we'll see if this catches back up with me. So McGuire, we were talking about the fact that, sometimes your English language and the way SQL thinks don't have to be perfect, but you do have to go back and forth sometimes to get the model to think and behave the way you want it to. So can you talk about maybe some of the iterative ways that you've crafted your language while I kind of reestablish this connection?
Yeah, sure. Going back to what you said sort of about using ChatGPT to do this, there is a way that you could do that, is thinking in your head about what sort of SQL code you want to come out, what graph you want to produce. You can work with ChatGPT and ask it, hey, I want to compare these two airports with their airlines. What sort of prompt could I generate to get you to produce exactly what I need? And then you just put that back in here, and it will evaluate the way that it needs to, while you sort of don't understand completely how it got there, but it understands what you want.
No. So basically what you've done is you said, I'm going to use the power of OpenAI, and I'm going to have a dialogue with it. And then I'm going to say, hey, in just OpenAI, how would I best form this question? And then you could paste that in to your plot. So you kind of have this, you're using the model for two reasons. One, you're saying, help me reason through this pretty sophisticated analysis that I want to do. And how would I turn that into a prompt that you could then paste in here, which would then get returned back to the LLM, right, to compute your code.
Yeah, and also if it does any sort of messing up, it will show you the SQL code. So you can ask ChatGPT, I want to change a little bit of this. Where can I change that in the prompt? And it'll output that for you as well.
Okay.
If you're good.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, is it loaded in yet?
Yeah. So it reconnected, no problem. And what's cool about this SDK is that, when OpenAI is busy, it's got an internal wait. So it'll retry and it'll do its thing. So it's okay. So yeah, it looks like it's back to performing what you said it was. So maybe walk through, what did it just build for us?
Yeah, so it's going to start that Spark session just as it always has. And then it is going to filter out the flights with no delay right on that line there. And as well as filter out flights only for Tampa and Cincinnati.
Yeah, did that right.
And then the next sort of chunk is going to, like we said, we gave it a little hint, and then find the intersection of airlines for the two cities.
Right.
Tampa and Cincinnati airlines.
Yep.
Filtered again and again. And it identifies the columns where they match.
Yep.
And then
with a join.
Then it filters the data set. Yep. And then it joins again, where it includes the flights from the common airlines. And then it'll calculate the average delay for each airline in each city. And then convert that Spark to Panda for plotting. And then it choose to do this sort of bar plot, which looks great. And then in red on the x-axis, it shows what airlines, and then it separates by that double conjoined bar graph with Tampa and Cincinnati in blue and red respectively.
Yeah, I mean, this is Guys, this is a pretty healthy amount of analysis. This is not trivial. I mean, there's a lot here. First of all, I mean, as you're reasoning through these things, when you're comparing two cities, in this case, you really only want to compare the airlines that are consistent with these two, the airlines that serve these two cities in this case. Because if not, your graph would be full of a bunch of single bars. You know, I don't know, some other airline, JetBlue or something, maybe that just goes to one of the cities, but not the other. So it's not a very good comparison. So the way you thought about tackling this problem in English is pretty cool, because this is kind of a final form analysis. I don't know what's going on with Mesa Airlines in Cincinnati. I have no idea, but clearly they've got a little bit of challenge compared to Tampa. But the other data don't look that radically different. Very cool. Okay. So guys, who's switching gears on us in the last 10 minutes? We want to introduce one final component that this tool can do all around testing the quality of your data. So who's up next?
Yeah. So, I mean, in this last little bit, we're just quality testing. We're testing out the years, and we have this amazing verify function inside our built-in tool to this. And you go, I expect no flights for years other than 2022 and 2023. And it's going to go through, it's going to send that off to OpenAI or ChatGPT. It's going to, I believe it's going to come out here.
Yep.
So we got some Spark code in here. We've got the check flight years definition, and it results in true. So it's only displaying the years of 2022 and 2023, which is the expected result, which is kind of cool. It's able to go through and verify that the data or the question that you asked is actually what is true inside of your data.
Yeah. Yeah, this is quite amazing, because one thing that data engineers, unlike developers, sometimes data engineers don't always, they're working so much on a lot of business logic and data engineering and transformation and ETL stuff. Unfortunately, our industry tests and attestations and other formal logic don't always play a center stage in testing. But of course, in analysis, it has to, and it's getting much better in the engineering discipline. Databricks has, and other platforms have these beautiful expectations and data attestation rules that we can declare about our data. But from an analyst perspective, what you guys are demonstrating here is it's not just asking questions about the data, but you can also declare the opposite, right? I don't expect to have, currency in anything other than USD. So if you had a bunch of receipt data, for example, with billions of rows in it, and maybe you had Canadian dollars or you had euros nested somewhere in a column, you could just declare a test and say, I expect no currency other than USD, and it would know how to reason through that. And you can see what it's doing here. All it's really doing is it's taking your English language and it's producing a query that just results in a true or false, right? Pretty amazing. All right, McGuire, walk us through this last test, and then we'll turn it back over to you, Ruthie. There's no other comments?
All right. Well, this is basically doing the same thing, but making it a little bit extra. And the prompt we have is, I expect the airline Envoy Air flies to both Tampa, Florida and Tulsa, Oklahoma. So again, this will probably do the same thing. It'll filter through the data set and look for Envoy Air flying to Tampa and then flying to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then it will return false if one or the other does, or neither do, and it will return true if they both have flights incoming from Envoy Air. And
yeah,
it comes up
the first part, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's got a lot of data to go through, and it comes out true. So it means that both cities have flights incoming from Envoy Air.
Yeah, or at least destination to. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. And again, it's quite amazing the power and the capability of this tool. So, all right, guys, any other final thoughts before we turn it over to you, Ruthie?
I actually have a couple questions that came in.
Right on.
So the first one I have is, can you summarize the key advantages of using English as an analytics language over SQL queries? And could you speak to the integrity of the code, data, and results?
Yeah, so I'll take that, guys, and give me some color what you think as you've progressed through this. So there's really two pieces there. So using English as a language. Again, I want to stress that at Blueprint, we feel that at the era where we are now, LLMs and ChatGPT and all the derivatives in the open source, et cetera, they're here to amplify your skills. Whether your skill is writing or your skill is creative development or web design or whatever it may be, we know these things can do amazing things. In this case, it's generating analytic code, mostly SQL and Python here. So I'm of the opinion now that the speed at which I can write an English statement to tease out the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 things that I want to mutate my data into for a final data set, I think I'm actually to the point now where English for me is more efficient than starting with the syntax of, let's start with the first query, the second query, and then the third query that calls from the first query and the second query and breaks it down and da. So, and that's just me. I'm not bad with SQL, but I'm not great. I'm not the world's best engineer. It's not my job. It's not my responsibility. So I've now gotten to the point prior even to this SDK, and this SDK just makes it so much easier, that I think I'm going to start with English first. The thing that I love the most, though, is, again, back to this point of it amplifying my skills, is I can look, we'll go back up to one of these earlier examples where it wrote SQL. We'll take one of these and we'll rerun it since we had that little error. I can look at the SQL and I can recognize in the SQL if there is an error. So if it made a reasoning error on, say, oh, it didn't do a group by the way I wanted to, or, it used a having clause and maybe it should have been a where clause. I have enough skill to be able to look at this SQL that it just generated and say, yep, this is good. I'll cut it and paste it and go. So the first part of your question is, I'm now to the point where English is my first analytic language. That's huge. The second, the capability or the code quality, I think was the question, Ruthie. Look, languages like SQL, ANSI SQL, for instance, I'm not doing T-SQL or Python or PL SQL, right? These languages that I can do error control and flow control and all those other things. This is just ANSI SQL, right? So it's just declarative analytical language. The quality is outstanding. I don't have an issue with it. In fact, occasionally when it spits out something, I'll throw it over to OpenAI and say, is there a more efficient way to do this? Is there a way to do this where the execution plan is better? And I expect these engines to get better and better and better about working with the way the model has been trained. In this case, it's not a trained model, but the model's been prompted. So one of the cool things about what the PySpark team has done, and I'll have to dig more into this, is they've actually enriched the prompts so that it's writing good Spark code in this case. So you get back code that's reasonably optimized. I expect they get better and better and better as they go, but the actual code quality is wonderful. I think they'll start to insert better notes. I mean, one thing that I would like to add in the package is, even if it's rudimentary, like select average as blah from, just give me some comments. Put a little dash off the edge that says, I've met your requirement here, I met your requirement here, and I met your requirement here, and then hit go. That'd be nice. But again, I expect that to evolve very, very quickly.
Okay, next question that we got in is, for someone who is new to Databricks and English as a language, what steps would you recommend to get started?
Oh, easy. I mean, if you're new to Databricks, okay, well, so if you're new to Databricks, without regard to this English piece, which you don't have to. If I didn't want to write English, I could write all the normal Databricks languages, which are Python, Scala, SQL, and R. So I have those 4 to pick from, which is the beauty of Databricks. And you can still use normal development languages. But if you want to get your hands into this this SDK, really you have 2 things you have to conquer first. One is just learning the UI of Databricks. Go to databricks.com/try, I think it is, or just go Google the community Databricks. You'll get a free trial and you can get a free environment, and you build a cluster. Then after that, once you've gotten the navigation experience of just working in these notebooks, which is unbelievably easy, then I would just, send you directly to, in this case, the project's website. This is the English for SDK site. It's also on GitHub. It's basically the same site. And folks, it is nothing more than pip install the package, which includes the wrapper and the functions that it extends to, in this case, a data frame. Other than just setting up your OpenAI key, and I wrote a blog about this to help. Ruthie, maybe we can share that blog later or in the notes. That's it. You're up and running. And with a minor initialization, you're now to the point where you can walk through those main components that we talked about. So the transform, the verify, the explain. There are some other functions that we didn't get into because they're a little nerdy, but yeah, you'd be up in no time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap things up, but if you have any questions that you'd like answered that we didn't get to, you can always send them over to info@bpcs.com and we'll get that answered for you as well. But I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists. We had Eric and then our interns as well. We have some really, really awesome workshops, webinars, demos, all lined up for you in the next couple weeks. We will have, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock on our LinkedIn Live. So I'm going to add a link into our comments here so that you can take a look at the one that we have coming up, and be sure to sign up for that one. This is going to be really great. It's going to be on the topic of attacking data governance and privacy with Databricks and Blueprint. So it's going to be a really great one. You don't want to miss that. Again, quick thank you to our presenters, but also a big thank you for everyone who joined in today. We will have the recording on our YouTube page, and we will also be posting everything on LinkedIn. So follow us on LinkedIn to hear about all of our other events coming up. Thank you so much, everyone, and have an awesome rest of your day.
Thanks, guys. Thanks all.
Thank you.